Let me tell you about an unbelievable event that happened to Emma and I today. I'm Emily, 37 years old. I'm a housewife who works part time at a supermarket. I live with my husband, Mike, who is 3 years older than me, our adorable daughter, Emma, who just started fifth grade this year, and Mike's mother, Susan, making us a family of four. Susan started living with us about 2 years ago. After her husband passed away, feeling lonely, she would call Mike almost daily. Initially, Mike refused, saying our apartment had no extra rooms, but Susan insisted on moving in. One day, suddenly a lot of boxes arrived, and I heard that Susan had even had her house taken down. Susan arrived soon after.
I have no home to return to now. Please let me live here.
I was speechless at her determination to live with us, and even Mike was surprised by Susan's assertiveness. However, Mike, who tends to be lenient with Susan, eventually agreed to the cohabitation. I immediately objected, but Susan, looking displeased, said,
That's a bit much, isn't it? Just because we're not related? I may be your mother-in-law, but I'm still family, your mother. How can you be so cruel?
Susan said this while crying. Seeing his mother cry, Mike quickly shifted his stance and began to support Susan.
If you have a problem, you can leave. This is my house. I'm the one who signed the lease.
Susan's tears suddenly turned me into the villain. It's always like this with her, showing tears only when it suits her. That's Susan's tactic. And so, it was decided that we would live with Susan. But then there was a dispute about which room she would use. Our apartment is a 3LDK. There's our bedroom, Emma's room, and a room labeled as Mike's workspace, which is actually his hobby room. That's all there was. Logically, it seemed best to convert Mike's hobby room into Susan's room, but Susan wanted to take Emma's room for herself.
This room gets good sunlight and is nice. That other room is too dark and feels like it could make me sick.
When Susan insisted on using Emma's bed and desk as they are, even I had to object. This is Emma's room. Everything, from the curtains to everything else, was personally chosen by her. It's her special space.
What's the big deal? It's extravagant for an elementary schooler to have her own room. I really need this room. Just make that other room into Emma's room.
Thinking his hobby room was under threat, Mike quickly reacted.
Yeah, it's too early for a grade schooler to have her own room. I saw on TV that studying in the living room is more productive, and she can just sleep with us when it's bedtime.
Emma seemed confused by Mike and Susan's arbitrary decisions. It's bewildering for a young girl when adults much older than her throw tantrums about wanting her room. But no matter what I said, Mike and Susan wouldn't listen. In the end, Susan, almost grabbing at her, demanded the room so insistently that Emma had no choice but to nod in agreement. Thus, our cohabitation with Susan began, and as expected, she started making my life miserable daily.
Frying food all the time. Don't you ever think about your health?
On the day I made French fries at Emma's request, Susan nagged about the cooking.
The cleaning is nowhere near done. Just because you work doesn't mean you can neglect your housewife duties. What a lousy wife you are.
Having just one hair on the floor was enough for her to accuse me of slacking off on housework. It became a daily occurrence. At first, she did it behind Mike's back, but soon she didn't care and openly harassed me. Mike wouldn't help at all, and Emma just looked lost. If I argued back, Susan, a genius at crying on cue, would immediately start shedding tears, leaving me unable to resist.
I had a chat with our neighbor the other day, and I had to set the record straight since they were praising you so much. Here I am, an elderly woman, and you don't consider my diet or even do the housework properly.
She spread nasty rumors about me to the apartment residents, and I felt utterly marginalized. Even though I was going through this, Mike, who should have been my ally, was nowhere to be found. He would devour Susan's salty meals day after day, often not even touching mine. Even as Mike's attitude grew colder, I was determined to keep a smile for Emma's sake. I kept pushing myself. Amidst all this, Emma hit puberty.
I don't want to sleep in the same room as Dad anymore.
Following Emma's statement, Mike started sleeping alone in his hobby room. Emma began to avoid Mike gradually. I always found Emma's adolescence endearing, likening it to my own younger days. But Mike felt differently.
Avoiding her father? Something must be wrong. You must have made her like that.
Somehow, I was the one being blamed. Seeing this, Emma seemed to grow even more disdainful towards Mike, furrowing her brows and glaring at him.
Dad, you're the worst. Stop picking on Mom.
Emma, once quiet and sweet, now argumentative to her father. I thought Mike would be shocked, but then Susan whispered something unnecessary into his ear.
Emma is half Emily after all. She'll probably end up cold like her mother.
Why would you say that? She's such a good girl. I couldn't contain my anger at Susan speaking ill of my precious Emma. At this point, Mike should have rebuked Susan, but instead, he glared at me and said,
Maybe I should have chosen a kinder wife. I made a mistake with my life.
I was so heartbroken. As the rift with Mike deepened and our home grew colder, Susan suddenly suggested a one-night trip to a hotel in the country.
I can't stand to see your relationship get this tense. Let's go to a hotel and refresh ourselves.
Whose fault do you think it is that our family is falling apart? Give me a break. A trip with you would be nothing but a torment. I screamed inside, but Mike agreed to Susan's proposal. Given the atmosphere, I felt I couldn't refuse, so I naturally let my gaze drift towards Emma, who was sitting next to me. I glanced at Emma, who had become adept at reading the room due to our family situation, and she immediately responded.
If Mom is going, I'll go too.
It was comforting to know that Emma, the only one on my side, would accompany me. And so, we were set for a one-night trip over the weekend. After we finished sightseeing, Susan mentioned there was a supposed spiritual spot deep in the nearby mountains, and she wanted to visit it.
There's supposed to be a spiritual spot, and since we're here, I'd like to check it out.
Mike immediately agreed, as usual. Overwhelmed by Mike and Susan's assertiveness, both Emma and I could do nothing but agree. The trip began under Susan's plan, but her arrogance was once again highlighted.
You drive. My son is tired from working the day before.
I had worked until the day before too, but I didn't argue. I could see it would only lead to trouble anyway. Due to her age, Susan needed frequent bathroom breaks, and she always took the opportunity to buy snacks or drinks. It took so much time that we ended up waiting around a lot. Because of all these delays, by the time we finished sightseeing and headed for the spiritual spot, it was already getting dark. Moreover, the spiritual spot was so remote it didn't even show up on the GPS, and I had to continue driving with directions from Susan, who sat in the back seat looking at the map.
Mom, are you okay? It's completely dark now.
Emma said anxiously, but Susan was adamant about going. We've come this far, let's go. Emma, please don't make the dampen the mood. Mike seemed to be sleeping off and didn't join the conversation. Emma was visibly upset. As the atmosphere in the car worsened, Susan suddenly raised her voice.
Could it be here?
When I switched the car lights to high beam, a lone building appeared ahead in the darkness. The lights aren't on. Maybe they're closed for the day?
Just go check it out.
It was already dark and clearly past business hours. Yet Susan made another unreasonable demand.
Hurry up, move as soon as you're told.
I don't know how many times I almost blurted out, "I'm not your servant." Somehow, I swallowed those words and got out of the car, with Emma following me, looking worried. As we walked towards the destination through the dark, we found nothing but an old building, definitely not a spiritual spot, and both Emma and I just tilted our heads in confusion. That's when I noticed that the car lights, which had been illuminating us, started moving. Turning around, I saw Mike, who had woken up at some point, driving the car with a nasty grin, while Susan, with the same grin, was in the passenger seat. Hey, wait.
Quiet. You two cool your heads here. This is what you get for treating the head of the family so carelessly.
Mike's words were unbelievable, and Emma and I could only stand there in shock. Susan leaned out of the passenger window and said,
You should be grateful you even got a ride in the family car, considering you're not even related by blood. Have fun on your own from here on out.
it was one thing to disregard me, but involving Emma was unforgivable. That was the moment my anger finally exploded.
Mom,
Emma looked up anxiously, so I patted her head reassuringly and immediately checked for cell reception on my smartphone. Fortunately, there was just enough signal, and I quickly called the hotel we had booked. The hotel staff, familiar with this mountain area, contacted the local authorities and the police, and Emma and I were safely rescued. We were advised to visit a hospital just in case, but since we only had some bug bites, we ended up staying at the hotel. Even at the hotel, Emma looked around anxiously.
Mom, Dad, and Grandma aren't here, are they?
Yeah, because I made all the hotel reservations, and they probably don't know we're here. That's right. I had arranged the entire trip myself. Mike and Susan hadn't helped at all. I wondered where they could have gone when they drove off and left us. That's when I noticed several missed calls from Mike and Susan on my smartphone. When I called back, Mike's desperate voice shook my eardrum.
Hey, which hotel did you book? Tell me quick.
Why should I tell the people who left us in the mountains? You didn't even know which hotel we were staying at before you abandoned us.
It's your fault for being defiant to Mom. It's a holiday, and no hotels are available now. I refuse to sleep in the car.
That's not my problem. Leaving us in the mountains could be a crime, you know? After my cold response, the phone was quickly handed to Susan.
It's dinner time already. Hurry up or we won't be able to eat.
Despite having left us, Mike and Susan acted arrogantly as if nothing had happened. I reluctantly gave them the hotel's name.
Why are you telling them where we are? We should just leave them alone.
It's okay. Trust me. After calming Emma by patting her head, I immediately called the police. Hello, my husband and mother, who abandoned us, are about to come here. Yes, please come quickly. It was good that we could contact someone at the hotel this time, but if we had been out of range, Emma and I might have been stranded. Even if they are family, I couldn't forgive endangering our lives. I decided without hesitation to report Mike and Susan to the police. While Emma and I were relaxing in our room, we got a call from the front desk and headed down. There, surrounded by police, were Mike and Susan, drawing curious stares from other guests, creating a bizarre scene.
We're guests here. Why do we have to be taken by the police?
Unlike Mike, who turned pale at the sight of the police, Susan was resisting loudly. Leaving us, especially a child, behind is considered abandonment. A chargeable offense, was what we were told by the police. Upon being informed by the police, Susan suddenly fell silent. However, her quick tongue never completely stopped.
She told us to go ahead first. Of course, we tried to stop her, but she insisted.
The police looked incredulous at her desperate lie. Seeing their hesitation to handle an elderly woman roughly, I suggested, "Please check the dashcam in the car. It records audio, and that should clarify everything." Hearing this, Mike finally crumbled to his knees.
I'm sorry, really sorry. I was completely out of my mind. I was wrong. Please forgive me.
Even as Mike begged for forgiveness, I felt no sympathy for him. There's nothing more pathetic than someone flipping their stance the moment their situation turns precarious. Emma and I quietly watched as Mike and Susan were put into the police car. To ensure they couldn't return, I canceled the extra room I had reserved for Susan. I made sure to tell the front desk staff to absolutely not let them in. Once again, Emma and I enjoyed the hotel's lavish cuisine. Even Emma, who had been sullen and defiant at home, was in high spirits. Right before bed, she even said this,
Mom, I want to live with just you.
"Are you sure? We might have to live in a smaller place, you know?"
Yeah, that's okay. I don't want to be with Dad and Grandma anymore.
Her words solidified my resolve. After a memorable trip, Emma and I safely returned home. We immediately packed our things and went to the city hall to get divorce papers. As I had not filed an official complaint, and as Susan tearfully apologized multiple times at the police station, Mike and Susan were not arrested and eventually came home. Ignoring Susan's attempts to blame me, I presented Mike with the divorce papers. "I can't stand being in a family with people like you. Please, let's get a divorce." Shocked by the divorce papers, Mike continuously apologized for his past behavior towards me. Meanwhile, Susan, unrepentant, glared at me and said,
Just because you were left in the mountains once, you want a divorce? Don't be ridiculous. You should continue to work here as a wife.
Despite her many harsh words, I ignored them all. Over the weekend, Emma and I visited several real estate agents and signed a lease for an apartment for the two of us to live in.
I was really wrong. I need you, Emily. Please come back.
It doesn't matter if I'm gone, right? Since we're just unrelated strangers after all. Please live happily with your real family, Susan. Ignoring Mike's pleas, I quickly moved out of the apartment. Mike was initially hesitant about the divorce even after we separated, but once I mentioned hiring a lawyer, he quietly signed the papers. The shared assets were split evenly, and I received a lump sum for child support until Emma graduates from college, marking the end of my relationship with Mike and Susan. They had to sell the apartment to make the child support payment, and are now living modestly in a small apartment. Mike has often expressed a desire to see Emma during events like her birthday and Christmas, but Emma has resolutely refused.
I never intend to see Dad again.
When Emma told him this, Mike seemed to age 10 years from the shock. He will probably be full of anxiety about Susan's future care needs. But that is no longer my concern. I have no desire to be involved with those two ever again. Moving forward, I plan to do well with Emma. Being abandoned on the mountain seems to have strengthened our bond. I'm prepared to face head-on any rebellious phases Emma might have in the future.